morning you guys, it's Karen and I'm here with an unusual video, I guess, because it's not about Mrs. Ginger's health, but it is about a hospital. I just thought it might be interesting to some of you to hear some of the things that went on that I found amusing. Some amusing little stories from when I worked in the hospital. I worked in the hospital for 10 years in medical research. I worked in different hospitals, so I would be like based at one with one job and I would visit the other one, and then I switched and was based at one that was nearer home, and then I worked from home and would just go into different hospitals for meetings. So I worked across about 4 or 5 hospitals, like I said, in medical research. But during my time working at the hospital, I loved the feeling of working in a hospital. And in fact, one of the ones I worked in, I was in a building that was attached to the hospital and it was more labs. And I preferred actually being in the hospital, you know, walking down the corridors where the patients were. I preferred that. But there were also some downsides to that. When I first started, the very first week I worked there, I was quite distressed by it all, because I remember going home on a Friday and seeing, I worked in the radiology department when I first started, and seeing a lot of people in the corridor where I worked. They were on oxygen and they had their oxygen with them and they were all waiting to get scanned. And I just was like, you know, do they have people coming to visit them? What's wrong with them? Are they happy? It took on a lot of worry when I first started. And another thing that happened was a real shock to me. I was in charge of making a system for radiology to register research. I was responsible for meeting with the radiologists and talking through why they may or may not approve a study. So for example, I had to liaise between a radiologist and somebody from the cancer, a surgeon from the cancer department, because the cancer surgeon wanted to do a scan of women with breast cancer, and he wanted to scan all of their stomach area to find out if there was any spread. But the radiologist didn't agree with the scan being done in that whole area because the radiation would risk the fertility. And I was going in, you know, backwards and forwards between them. The cancer surgeon was like, well, you know, they've got cancer, fertility is not an issue. The radiologist was like, yes, it should be their decision. So we ended up having to put it in the paperwork, and I would give them guidance on how to do that. Anyway, this one particular study, I had gone in to see my boss, and he was a professor. He was a professor in radiology. And I had said, you know, I don't understand why there's, say, 100 patients on this study, but it looks like we're only charging, I think this was a drug study. And I was like, why are we only charging the drug company for half of these patients? And I'll never forget his answer. I was trying not to cry when he said it. He said to me, well, the other half will be dead. And ironically, he died. He died a couple of years ago. He dropped dead of a heart attack. Anyway, that's completely irrelevant, but I just was so shocked that he was so flippant about it, especially since I actually had a friend that was on that particular study, and the fact that he just so flippantly said it. But by the time I left the NHS, I could have spoken about it in the same way. I just don't think I would have been quite so flippant. But you get used to the fact that you're talking to colleagues, you know that you're able to talk factually about things, you know, and the fact of the matter was this research study was a last ditch attempt. But to me, just starting off in the radiology and research department, I felt like, no, surely we should have more hope than this, you know, surely that's the point of them going on a research study, that we're trying something out that might work and they might not die. You know, I just felt like it was a real negative thing to say and not very hopeful or anything like that, you know. But I think I just wasn't, that was a bit of a dream world, unfortunately. So yeah, like I said, I was a bit emotional my first couple of weeks working in the hospital. I just couldn't believe every day I would come in and be like, oh my God, I'm working in a hospital, I'm so excited. But then these things would happen and I'd be like, oh God. Particularly as they told me, they showed me the toilet that we were to use, and it was the nuclear toilet, and I was like, that kind of freaked me out. You know, it was the one that people use that are having radiation, when they have to use a specific toilet because it doesn't go where all the rest of the toilet stuff goes. You know, I was like, I'm a bit freaked out by this. I loved that if I went to the shop, I'd be standing in line with people that were in dressing gowns or in their hospital gown holding a drip, or, you know, it just, I don't know why I loved that. I don't know what I loved about that. I think because all my life I've been interested in, you know, medicine, that it just reminded me constantly where I was, you know. In fact, a funny thing happened. I went running round a corner. I think I was trying to get back to my office to take a call or something like that, and bumped into this guy. And I was like, oh, sorry. And as I sort of stood back, I was like, oh. And there was a policeman either side of him, handcuffed to him. And I was like, oh, I'm really sorry, and sort of scurried away, you know. And that was something I had never expected to see in a hospital. But of course, you know, people that are in prison need treatments as well. So story number 1 is about placebos. You may have heard me talk about this over on my channel. I think I've mentioned it once before. This was just something that amazed me. And this was quite far down the road of me working. This was probably when I'd been there 7 or 8 years. I had to attend these meetings, and at these meetings there was all sorts of different specialists there, you know, and we would discuss studies that had gone on in a particular facility in the hospital. And you know, if anybody had been admitted to hospital that was on this study, or if anybody had had any bad side effects, or, you know, things like that. And at this one particular meeting, it was brought up that there had been 2 complaints. And so you have to take these complaints really seriously. And it was to be discussed. But the first letter was saying, ever since this person had been on the study, they had felt awful. They'd never felt worse in their whole life. They weren't happy. Why on earth were we doing a study with this drug, etc., etc. That person had been instantly taken off the study. But what happens then is, normally studies that involve drugs are blind, and they're double blind. It means that nobody except one allocated person knows whether the person on the study is on the real drug or is on the placebo drug, the pretend drug. And so it had been what we called unblinded, and it turned out that he wasn't taking a drug, which I just found so ironic, you know, because he's complaining that ever since taking this drug he's felt awful, but he was taking a water tablet, or, you know, he wasn't taking any active medication at all. They immediately unblinded him and saw that he was not on the medication. I just thought that was so much, there was so much evidence in that for the placebo effect, both in a good way and in a bad way. The next complaint letter, and honestly I can't remember if this was in the exact same meeting, it might have been a week apart, but the next complaint letter that I remember was a similar fashion, but it was in a good respect. It was a lady saying that ever since she'd been on this trial, she had felt amazing. It was wonderful. The drug she took was amazing. And she was unblinded. And again, she wasn't on the active drug. So it was another example of the placebo effect. And I just think that's so interesting what your mind can do. You know, they looked into it. There was nothing else that had changed. Neither of these people ended up having anything different. You know, there was no reason he'd gone downhill. There was no reason she'd got better. They were both on a placebo drug, and it was nothing to do with the study at all. So I found that really interesting. One not so nice story is that we had a guy that was in prison that needed dialysis, needed kidney treatment, and he, I don't know why, but was extremely violent and abusive to all of the staff, all of the nurses. And he would tell the nurses that he was going to rape them. And it was really horrific, you know. And so I spoke to a couple of them. A couple of them were telling me about it. And there was lots of nurses that would refuse to work with him, and quite rightly so. And they had the right to do that. But what ended up happening is he was only allowed male nurses, the ones that agreed to go in there, because he was abusive to them as well. But he was actually built a special room that was away from where everybody else was having their dialysis. And there was outrage in the hospital because of all this money had been spent for this prisoner, you know, and all these resources. And he was just so nasty. And I just found it really shocking, you know, that, I mean, he denied it. He was on a documentary, he got out of prison, he was on a documentary, and he denied it. But you know, I heard it from the nurses' mouths, and we wouldn't have just built this extra room for no reason. And I always just wondered why, you know, why was he so venomous? So that was interesting, but not so great. And there was another incident that wasn't so great, although I didn't have much to do with it closely. But there was a woman that killed her whole family in a fire in Edinburgh and was in the hospital. And while she was in the hospital, we had to have extra security and extra police, etc., because there were, you know, threats being made to her life because of what she'd done. And alarms kept going off. Now, I was mostly in, remember I said when I worked at this one particular hospital, I worked in the labs bit that was attached to the hospital. So I wasn't in the hospital a lot of the times when it happened. But I was, one day I had gone to get my lunch because the shop was in the main part of the hospital. And I'd gone to get my lunch and I was on my way out and the alarm went off again. And it wasn't a fire alarm. It was like a different alarm. And there's a voice coming over it that says, please do not leave the building. The doors can't automatically lock or anything, but it's telling you, please don't leave the building. And I was like, you know, just a few feet from the door leaving. And I was like, I am out of here, because I thought, I'm pretty sure I knew what it was about. And I thought, it's going to be that woman and somebody's come in again and tried to attack her. So there's some crazy person on the loose. And I was like, I am out of here. So I got through the doors and went back to my office, but I felt really guilty, you know, for not obeying the rules, if you like. Another thing that happened that wasn't great either was a guy, it did have some comedy effect to it after the fact, but I was waiting to meet a researcher in the hospital corridor, just out. We used to meet in the little cafe. There was a little volunteer cafe type thing, and I used to meet researchers in there. So I was sitting outside so that the researcher recognised me, because, you know, a lot of the time we just dealt by email and phone. And I said I'd meet him outside this cafe, and a man appeared and he started talking to me about, you know, it wasn't really making sense. You know, he was saying, is the meeting at 10? Which way is the meeting? When? And I thought, is this the researcher I'm meeting? Surely not, because if it is, he's, you know, having a bit of a funny turn kind of thing. That's weird. I thought I heard Watson's footsteps in the hall and he's not even here. Anyway, all of a sudden, this guy falls on top of me, but as he falls onto my lap, he hits his head on, I was on a row of those seats, you know, that are kind of, they're all joined together with metal. Hits his head on the metal, it splits his head open, and it rolls off me. I'm trying to hold him, but he's a big guy, onto the floor, and there is blood everywhere, absolutely everywhere. It was horrific, and he was fitting. Well, of course, I'm not medical, so I screamed help, because as luck would have it, where I was sitting was literally round the corner from, it was minor injuries, but there was going to be, you know, doctors around there. So I screamed help, and a couple of people came running from there. God knows what I'd have done if I was somewhere else. I suppose it would have just been help, and somebody would have rung to get somebody out, you know, and he's lucky that it happened in a hospital. But it was just awful, because I've never seen so much blood in all my life. It was from his head, it just literally pulled all around him, and I was like, oh my God, like, he cannot survive that. How can he survive losing that much blood, you know? So anyway, I went upstairs and phoned, they actually cordoned off the area. So I went upstairs and left a message for the researcher. I hadn't seen him at that point, but I was really shaken up, and I phoned my boss and told her, and she was like, oh, go home for the afternoon. And I was like, no, it's fine. I'll sit at my desk, but obviously I can't meet the researcher because it was all cordoned off to clean up and to get the guy, you know, to work on the guy. I didn't want to stand there and watch. And so I didn't know where I could then meet him, because the bit we were going to meet at was sort of within that area. And so I just kind of got on with my work. But I remember I went the following day to the other hospital and was chatting to the office manager, and she was laughing at me because I was saying, after it happened, one of the nurses came up to me and said, are you the one that screamed? And I said to her, oh yeah, I was the one that shouted for help. But for some reason, when I told this to the office manager, she thought it was hilarious, because she said, I can just imagine you screaming, you know, that this man falls on you and you just scream. And the reason I was discussing it was, and then the director came in, actually, the director told me that I should go and ask an A&E, show them my NHS pass and ask if they can tell me if he's okay, because I just was so worried about him. I was like, I'm sure he's died, and I was like, oh, I don't know if I want to know. And I was like, could I have done anything different? I mean, I didn't do anything, he fell on top of me, but I was like, could I have caught him so he didn't catch his head? I was just so shocked, you know. But I think it's natural to question yourself, isn't it? And, you know, could I have prevented that happening to him, or done anything else at the time rather than just be like totally panicked? And yeah, my boss was saying to me, no, go. I was saying, I can't go and ask. I don't know his name. I don't know who he is. And, you know, the office manager was laughing, and just go and say I was the one that screamed. And I eventually did go and ask, and he did survive, and he was absolutely fine. He was epileptic. So, you know, all's well that ends well. God knows how he survived that. He survived with no damage. I didn't think they'd tell me because I wasn't a relative, and I know that I'm staff, but I'm not actually in that department. But they were like, it's okay to tell you that, and they told me that he was fine. So I was delighted with that. But the final thing I will tell you about was kind of funny as well, funnier than any of these other kind of morbid stories. But I was walking, I worked on the floor above X-ray at another hospital. I've had a few different offices in different places, and I used to always get the lift down, and my boss, who was a cardiologist, was coming with me. We were going to a meeting, and he went to get the stairs, and I said, oh, can we get the lift because of my knee? And he went, no, we need to go down the stairs because he's a cardiologist. He was like, you should be going down the stairs. But then I persuaded him to get in the lift. I think I had a really sore knee that day. The next time I went to go downstairs, I thought, you know what, I'm going to go down the stairs because my knee's not too bad today, and he's right, I need more exercise, blah, blah, blah. And I was holding on to the rail, but I slipped down the stairs. My ankle just kind of gave way, and I fell about half the flight of the stairs and landed at the bottom. And you know when you just land and know that you've done something? I'm actually kind of scared to even look down. I knew I'd done something to my ankle, and I was like, is it twisted a funny way? Or, you know, I was like lying there thinking, why is there no pain? But I just know that I've done something. And I thought, right, I can't just lie here in the corridor, you know, in the stairwell. So I went to move, and then it was agony, and I was like, oh, okay, I'm going to have a look at it. So I looked down, and all that had happened is it swelled up. It was like, looked like there was a tennis ball on the side of my ankle. And so I thought, yeah, I'm pretty sure I'm not going to be able to walk on that. But I was just at the bottom of the steps, and there was a door in front of me, but it was quite a way in front of me. And I was like, what am I going to do? And so I started screaming for help. And the floor I'd landed on was the radiology floor. Nobody seemed like forever, you know, I don't know how long I was actually there, but I ended up, didn't have my mobile phone on me, I ended up sort of dragging myself along the floor to get to the door. But then I got there and was struggling to open it because of course the handle is halfway up, and you'd have to, you know, it was one of those that was sort of fitted into the frame. But I eventually managed to kind of grab hold of the bottom of it and pull it open, and I poked my head out. I still couldn't see anybody, and I was just shouting help, 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 and then suddenly a porter came round the corner, and I shouted help, and it was so funny because he was looking in front of him and clearly could hear me saying help but couldn't see where I was, and I was like on the floor. And he looked down, but it must have been really weird for him because he would have just seen this head poking out from a door, you know. And I said to him, I fell down the stairs, I can't get up, you know. So he was like, oh my God. So he went and got a wheelchair, and a nurse came round, and they took me down one more floor to minor injuries. And I can't remember what I had done, torn something, and ended up having a hairline fracture in my ankle. Still to this day it goes sometimes. But I just thought it was really ironic that I was in a hospital, and yet I was lying there and nobody could hear me, you know, and that I was near the A&E department or the minor injuries department, and I don't know, I just thought that was really, really funny. And that I'd only gone down the bloody stairs because my cardiologist had told me it was better. My boss had said it was better to do, and I thought I should have known better, that my knees wouldn't, you know, aren't good enough really for me to be going downstairs. So yeah, that was that. I think that's enough stories for today. I'm sure I've got plenty more stories I can tell you, but let me know if you like this type of video where I'm just chit-chatting. I am off to see my client, which is a dog today called Morley, and I'm really excited. So we shall see how that goes, and I will talk more about that somewhere at some point. Thank you so much for listening today. I hope you enjoyed that, and I'll speak to you soon.